If you look at our legislative agenda from January of 2010, it is skewed to the wealthy, corporate welfare, big business, big pharma, big food. The big food guys, they go to the politicians and say, listen, I want you to let me put the fertilizer in the food. Excuse me? Yeah, we're going to put the fertilizer in the kids' cereal because it's going to make the product last longer on the shelf. So we have food in the country that is literally like eating poison, but the politicians said, no problem, let's do that because we're getting the money from the big food companies. This all came from this Supreme Court case called 𝗔𝗵𝗲𝗰𝘀𝗀. If there's not a lot of want in a society, then people don't take the risks of doing things that are wrong. Just think about that. No want, you have less of a proclivity or a temptation to do something wrong. But if you're hurting, you're like, okay, I'm going to go steal from that drugstore, or I'm going to go rob that person's car. And so we've got to get back to something that's more basic for the American people. And so it's not communistic or being socialistic to want people to have an equal opportunity. I don't believe in equal outcomes. You guys have built a phenomenal business, and you deserve your economic success, and you deserve the economic rent from the hard work. You should not have equal outcomes in a society, but you do need to create a platform of equal opportunity, and we're not doing that in America anymore. You need an education system that's fair to the poor. If you grow up in a rich neighborhood in the United States, you get a very good public school education. If you grow up in a inner city in the United States, forget it. They're passing you through the grades without teaching you the basics. And so yeah, no, you have a lot of things going right. It's a unique country, though, a population of 5 million, certain part of the world. You've got great natural resources that you're drawing upon, and you have a culture where you understand that there's a need for some level of collectivism to make everybody safe and to make everybody happy. That's never going to be the United States. The United States is risk-taking immigrants that arrive penniless, that are, you know, they're gambling. they're pushing themselves. They're taking risks. They're throwing the ball. And so you can't expect that from the United States, but there are things that we could do that could create the necessary reform. One of the first things would be to end the gerrymandering. Because if you ended the gerrymandering, you would force the politicians back into the middle. Remember, these campaigns are marketing competitions, and they're just seeking the measure and they're seeking the policy that's going to please the most amount of people in their district. And so if you mix the districts with Republicans and Democrats, guess what happens? They have to start to get into the middle, and they have to start being more moderate. Can I talk about Citizens United? Is that okay?
Definitely.
Okay, so there's an obscure Supreme Court decision that you may not be familiar with here. But in January of 2010, there was a Supreme Court decision called Citizens United. And Justice Scalia at the time wrote the case, and he basically said if you're super wealthy in the United States, it is your First Amendment right. It's your right to your freedom of expression to use your money in any way you want in politics. And so let's say I'm worth $10 billion and I believe in a candidate. I could take $1 billion and put it towards that candidate's potential success. And if you think about it, this is what Elon Musk did in November of last year. He spent over $390 million helping Donald Trump in some of those swing states. Prior to Citizens United, we had certain restrictions in the society as it related to our campaign donations and what we could spend on. And I submit to everybody in this room, this has created a separate but equal democratic system in the country. If you look at our legislative agenda from January of 2010, it is skewed to the wealthy, corporate welfare, big business, big pharma, big food. You know, the big food guys, they go to the politicians and say, listen, I want you to let me put the fertilizer in the food. Excuse me? Yeah, we're going to put the fertilizer in the kids' cereal because it's going to make the product last longer on the shelf. Would you guys allow that in Norway? Would the EU allow that? So we have food in the country that is literally like eating poison, but the politicians said, no problem, let's do that because we're getting the money from the big food companies. Does everybody understand that? We're chlorinating the chicken in the United States. You guys chlorinate your chicken? I don't think you guys do that.
No.
And so, but we allow that. This all came from this Supreme Court case called Citizens United. So there are things you could do. You could end Citizens United. You could end the gerrymandering. You could create what I'm calling a platform of equal opportunity, where you're making sure the areas of the country that are indigent have certain services. We're doing the very opposite of that right now, though. We've told people we're going to take your Medicaid away. 17 million people are now coming off of Medicaid, and then the rural hospitals. You know, there's a rule in the United States: if you walk into a hospital, it's the ethical obligation of the hospital and the attending official to take care of you. It could be a broken leg, even a sore throat. If you come into the emergency room, they have an obligation. So the rural hospitals went to the Trump administration and said, you're going to knock us out of business. You're taking 17 million people off of Medicaid, which is an easier, more economically efficient way to distribute the health care, and you're going to force them into the emergency rooms when they're sick, which is the most expensive way to treat somebody. So you know what the Trump administration did? They said, okay, no problem. We're going to give each of these rural hospitals some money to protect them. It was cheaper for them to do that because we want to give the tax breaks to our friends who are the very wealthy. Now, I can tell you that does not work in a society, okay? I don't think there's one person here in Norway that wants to live in a barbed-wired McMansion with a security perimeter while your fellow neighbors are suffering. I don't think there's one person I could find in Norway that said, yeah, that works for me. But there is an indifference now from some of these very wealthy people. And again, to provide historical context, this happened in the United States in the 1890s, and you needed some tough politicians to come in to break that up and to make it more fair. So it's not something that hasn't happened before, but it's going to require a certain type of leadership to break this.
80 million people thinks it's okay to have a president that is constantly insulting and dividing people into groups, calling names, so on and so forth. You know what where I'm going. Is this now a part of the American culture? To be insulting?
Well, I think that it's, well, let me put it this way. If we were kids and we were in school, we said, well, character is destiny, and if you have good character, good things will happen to you. Trump is the reverse of that. So good things have happened to him. You know, he's risen to the American presidency, breaking all the rules and being immoral and being very divisive. And so that I think is very bad for our culture, because it's teaching young people, oh, well, the president does this and the president does that, so therefore that provides space for me to do it. So that's very, very bad. But I think it's a little unfair to say that the 80 million people accept it, because I talk to the 80 million people. I'm in the street spending time with them, and I think the messaging is a little different. I hate that part of him, but I also hate the establishment. I hate that part of him, but I don't have a job, and the people are not helping me get a job, and so he's smashing into the people that I feel are not helping me. I think it's important to differentiate what's going on. Moreover, again, what I said earlier is true. The best thing Trump has going for him are the Democrats, because if they had he has very low-level approval ratings. He's at a 38% approval rating right now. He typically polls below 50%. He got to 50% during the election and won the popular vote, primarily because they didn't field a great candidate. Now, I like Vice President Harris. I worked with her on her debate prep. I was with her the night of the debate. I worked with her and Gavin Newsom after the debate. But unfortunately, she just wasn't the right candidate, and they only gave her 107 days to beat. You're not going to like this, but let me just tell you who he is. He's the most famous person in the world. He's definitely the most famous politician. So you put a woman who was the vice president that had a 71% name recognition in the country against a person that had a 100% name recognition. And so you made it impossible for her. But if Newsom had ran against her, or somebody else had ran, and they went through a formal Democratic primary process and they built a war chest. Remember, Harris came into the race late July, and she had to use Joe Biden's team. Her field operation wasn't in California, her home state, but it was in the state of Delaware, where Joe Biden was from. It was, if you said, okay, how am I going to create an impossible situation for somebody? I could give you all those ingredients, and that was her campaign. So I submit to you that we would have extinguished Donald Trump from the political landscape if the Democrats had consolidated. But here's what the Democrats do, which I tell you is really bad for them. They get very righteous, and they want to cancel people. So Robert mentioned 80 million people. I talked to certain Democrats. They want to cancel those 80 million people. I don't want to do that. I want to bring those 80 million people back into the mainstream and back into the family of America. We can't cancel 80 million people any more than you could cancel the Nazi Party at the end of the Second World War. You know what Hitler's approval rating was in April of 1945? He had a 42% approval rating. The entire country was destroyed. Okay, 60 million people dead as a result of his antics in the Second World War. He still had a 42% approval rating. Do you know what the United States had to do at the end of the Second World War? We hired the SS. Why did we hire the SS? We had to pay them to police keep the area. You know, should we have hired the SS? People would look at that and say morally that was a bereft thing to do. But from a practical point of view, Eisenhower knew if he didn't do that, he wasn't going to stabilize the area. These things can't be overly morally righteous. They have to be elements of practicality to them. The Democrats are like, hey, I was helping Harris. The hard left told her, I don't want Anthony on the campaign plane. And Harris said, well, why don't you want him on the campaign plane? He's trying to help us. He once worked for Donald Trump. And so he's canceled to us. We don't want him on the plane. Okay, that's fine. But if you do that, you're not going to create the coalition necessary to beat somebody that has the force, the political force of Donald Trump.